Dorothy Wells had $187 in her checking account and 9 days until rent was due. Not 9 days until something else came through. 9 days until the landlord's knock. She was 34 years old, working the overnight shift at Elm Ridge Nursing Home on the west side of Milwaukee, and raising a 6-year-old daughter in a 2-bedroom apartment where the refrigerator held half a carton of eggs, a jar of peanut butter, and a gallon of milk that was going to make it through Thursday if they were careful. Ivy was asleep in the back room. It was 11 at night. It was raining. Someone knocked. Dorothy opened the door. An old man stood on the front step, coat soaked through. No bag, no suitcase. Nothing on him except a small tin box held tight against his chest with both hands. He looked at her. She looked at the couch in the living room. He didn't ask to come in. That was the first thing she noticed. He said, "Excuse me, ma'am. Is there a shelter nearby? I was told there's one on Vine Street." His voice was steady, not begging, not performing, just a man asking a question in the rain. Dorothy knew the answer. The shelter on Vine closed intake at 9. It was after 11. She told him that. He nodded once slow, like he had expected it. He said, "Thank you." He turned and stepped off the porch. She watched him walk. 3 steps, 4. The rain was the kind Milwaukee gets in late October. Not dramatic, just constant, the kind that soaks through everything without announcing itself. His coat was already dark with it. He walked with the particular care of someone whose body did not move the way it used to. Each step deliberate, each one slower than the last. She looked back inside. Ivy was asleep in the back bedroom. The apartment was warm. The couch was empty. She looked at the man again. He was at the sidewalk now, the tin box still pressed against his chest. She said, "Hey." He stopped. He didn't turn around immediately, like he wasn't sure the word was meant for him. She said, "One night, just the couch." He turned. He looked at her for a long moment. Not grateful, not relieved, something else. Something closer to recognition, like he was seeing a thing he had stopped expecting to see. He came back up the steps. She held the door open. He stepped inside and stood just past the threshold, dripping on the mat, not moving further until she moved first. She went to the hall closet and pulled out a blanket old clean, the one she kept for cold nights when the heat didn't stretch far enough. She set a pillow on the couch. He sat down slowly. He placed the tin box on his lap. Then he lay back and set it on his stomach, both hands on it, fingers curled around the edges. He closed his eyes, and even as his breathing slowed, his hands did not let go of that box. He held it the way you hold something that contains more than it weighs. Dorothy turned off the kitchen light. She went to her bedroom. She closed the door. She locked it. She pulled Ivy close, felt the girl's small back rise and fall against her chest. She lay in the dark listening. The apartment was quiet, the rain on the window, the low hum of the refrigerator. Nothing else. She did not sleep for a long time. Not because she thought he would do something, but because she had just let a stranger into her home where her daughter slept, and the part of her that had learned to be careful was still standing at the door, still watching, still not entirely sure the part of her that had called him back was right. Both parts were hers. She let them argue in the dark until exhaustion settled it for her. She woke at 6:15. The apartment smelled like dish soap. She came out of the bedroom and stopped in the hallway. The couch was made. Not just the blanket pulled up, made. The blanket folded into a neat square at one end. The pillow centered on top of it. Corners aligned, the kind of precise, quiet care that comes from a person who has been a guest before and knows exactly how to leave a room better than they found it. Clarence was at the kitchen sink. The dishes from the night before, the ones Dorothy had left soaking because she had been too tired after her shift, were on the drying rack. He was washing the last one. His hands moved slowly. They shook a slight tremor that made the plate rattle once against the edge of the sink, but he held it with both hands and set it down carefully, the way someone handles things when their body has started to betray them, but their habits haven't changed. Dorothy stood in the hallway watching him. She didn't say anything. Ivy came out of the bedroom. She walked right past Dorothy, right up to the old man at the sink, and looked up at him. She said, "Are you Grandpa?" Clarence stopped. His hands went still in the water. A silence that lasted longer than it should have. He looked down at her. He said, "No, sweetheart. Just passing through." Ivy said, "Passing through to where?" He didn't answer. He looked at the plate in his hands. Dorothy saw that. She saw the question land, and she saw him choose not to catch it. He dried his hands on the dish towel. He folded it and hung it on the oven handle. He picked up the tin box from the counter where he had set it while washing. He moved toward the door. Dorothy said, "There's coffee." He stopped. It was not an invitation to stay. It was coffee. But they both knew what it meant to offer coffee to a man who was about to walk back out into nothing. He sat down at the kitchen table. She poured 2 cups. Ivy climbed into the chair next to him and asked him his name. He said Clarence. Ivy said Clarence. What? He said just Clarence is fine for now. They drank coffee. Ivy drew circles on the table with her finger. Nobody said much of anything. It was the quietest morning Dorothy had had in 2 years. Not empty quiet, the other kind. Dorothy Wells grew up on the south side of Memphis, in a house with 3 bedrooms, 2 sisters, 1 bathroom, and a mother who worked 6 days a week as a housekeeper for a family across town, $1,400 a month. 22 years without missing a single day. 3 children fed, clothed, enrolled and present for every school, morning, every church, Sunday, every single thing that mattered. Her father died when she was 11. Heart attack. Tuesday morning, he was 43. Her mother did not take a day off. She went to work that Wednesday because the family she cleaned for was hosting a dinner party on Friday and the silver needed polishing. She came home that night, sat at the kitchen table and cried for 2 hours after the girls were asleep. Dorothy knew because she wasn't asleep. She stood in the hallway and watched through the crack in the door. She never told her mother she had seen it. Her mother had a phrase she used. Not often, only when it counted. She would say it when one of the girls complained about helping a neighbor, or when someone at church needed a ride, and it was inconvenient, or when the world asked more than it gave, and the answer still had to be yes. She would say, "A locked door keeps you safe. An open door keeps you human. You gotta know which one to use, and when." Dorothy carried that sentence the way some people carry scripture, not always sure what to do with it but unable to put it down. She moved to Milwaukee at 22, married Terrell at 26. Ivy came at 28. The marriage was not bad. It was not good. It was the kind of thing where you wake up one morning and realize the person next to you has been absent for longer than you noticed. Not violent, not cruel, just gone while still being there. The kind of absence that doesn't leave a bruise, so you don't notice the damage until the structure gives way. He moved out when Ivy was 4, sent money for 3 months, then stopped. No fight, no explanation. Just a number that used to appear in her account and then didn't. Dorothy did not call a lawyer. She picked up extra shifts. Overnight at Elm Ridge, 10 at night to 6 in the morning. 5 nights a week. Ivy slept at Pearline's on those nights. Pearline was the neighbor, 2 doors down, 71 years old. The kind of woman who had raised enough children that one more sleeping on her couch was not a question but a fact. She never asked for money. Dorothy brought groceries every Friday anyway. That was the life. The edges were tight, and the margin was thin, and nothing in it was wasted. Dorothy was not the kind of person who opened her door to strangers. She had spent 34 years learning exactly which doors to lock and when. She had watched her mother give and give and give until giving was the only shape she recognized, and she had promised herself she would be more careful than that. And then an old man knocked on her door at 11 at night in the rain, and she let him in. Not because she was naive, because she had spent enough years on the other side of need to know what it looked like when there was nowhere else to go. She recognized it the way you recognize a word in a language you thought you had forgotten. The second morning Dorothy came home from her shift at 6:20, and the kitchen faucet was not dripping. It had been dripping for 4 months. A slow, steady leak that she had put a bowl under and emptied twice a day because a plumber cost $120 she did not have. She walked into the kitchen and turned the handle. Nothing. Dry. Tight. Fixed. Clarence was on the couch, reading a paperback he had found on the shelf by the door. He did not mention the faucet. She looked at it. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything about it. The third morning. Ivy's bedroom door no longer squeaked. It had been squeaking since before the divorce. A high, thin sound every time it opened or closed. Dorothy noticed it the way you notice silence, where there used to be noise, Ivy told her at breakfast. She said, "The grandpa man fixed it." Dorothy looked at Clarence across the table. He said the noise was keeping her up. That was all he said about it. The fourth day, Dorothy came home and the bathroom faucet handle, which had been loose for a year, and spun a full rotation before catching, was tight and firm. She stood in the bathroom looking at it. She went to the living room. Clarence was sitting on the couch. The tin box on the cushion beside him. She said, "You should." He said, "I know. I'll find somewhere." He said this every morning, and every morning something in the apartment that had been broken was no longer broken. The towel rack in the bathroom, the lock on the back door that hadn't latched properly since she moved in, the kitchen drawer that stuck, each one done without announcement, without negotiation, without asking whether it was welcome. His hands shook when he held a coffee cup, a tremor that was always there, worse in the mornings. But when he held a wrench or a screwdriver, the shaking stopped. His hands became steady and precise, the way hands get after decades of doing one thing, until the thing becomes more natural than rest. Dorothy noticed. She did not ask about it. She watched a man whose body was failing him in every way, except the one that let him be useful, and she understood something she couldn't quite name, that he wasn't staying because he had nowhere to go. He was staying because fixing things was the only language he had left for saying thank you. By the end of the fourth day, she had stopped saying "you should." She had not decided he could stay. She had simply stopped saying the words that would make him leave. Caroline was waiting on her porch when Dorothy came to pick up Ivy on Friday evening. She had that look, the one she wore when she had something to say and had been deciding all day how to say it. Dorothy sat down next to her. Ivy was inside watching cartoons. Caroline said, "Ivy told me about the grandpa man." Dorothy said, "His name is Clarence." Caroline said, "She likes him." A pause. A long one. The kind where the next sentence is already written and the person is just deciding whether to read it out loud. She said, "That's what worries me." Dorothy said, "He's leaving soon." Caroline looked at her. She said, "You said that Tuesday." One sentence. It cut through everything Dorothy had been telling herself for 5 days. She didn't have an answer for it because there wasn't one. Caroline was not wrong. Caroline had never been wrong about the things that mattered, which was exactly why Dorothy left Ivy with her and not anyone else. Caroline said, "I'm not telling you what to do. I raised 4 children and buried a husband, and I have never once told another woman how to run her house." She said, "But that little girl in there has already lost one man who was supposed to stay. She doesn't need to lose another one she's decided to love." Dorothy said, "She hasn't decided to love him." Caroline looked at her the way old women look at younger women when the younger one has just said something she doesn't believe herself. Neither of them spoke for a while. Across the street, Deacon Harris was on his porch. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the newspaper in his hands. But Dorothy knew. In this neighborhood, porches were watchtowers. People saw everything and said nothing unless it needed saying, and sometimes not even then. She had felt his eyes on the apartment for days, not hostile, just present. The quiet surveillance of a block that had learned to keep track of what came and went because the city never did. Dorothy took Ivy home. She opened the front door and stopped. The apartment smelled like food. Not reheated food, not microwave food, real food. Rice and something with onions and garlic cooked slow, the kind of smell that fills a kitchen and then fills the rest of the house and then fills something in you that you didn't know was empty. Clarence was at the stove. Ivy ran past. Dorothy dropped her backpack on the floor and climbed onto the kitchen chair. She said, "What is it?" Clarence said, "Rice and beans." "Nothing fancy." Ivy said. "It smells fancy." Dorothy stood in the doorway. She had not come home to the smell of someone cooking in 2 years, not since before the divorce, not since before the silence. She stood there and let it reach her, the heat from the stove, the sound of Ivy talking, the sight of an old man stirring a pot in her kitchen like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. It was not ordinary. She knew that. Pearline was right. The neighborhood was watching. The man was a stranger. She had a daughter who was already drawing him pictures and asking if he could stay for her birthday. She knew all of that. She sat down at the table anyway. They started talking in the evenings. Not all at once, not about anything that mattered. Small things, the way conversations go when two people are still circling the edges of trust. They sat on the front porch after Ivy went to bed. The street, quiet. The Milwaukee night, doing what Milwaukee nights do in late October, cold enough to notice, not cold enough to go inside. Clarence said the beans could have been better with cumin. Dorothy said she didn't have cumin. He said, "I know. I used the garlic powder in the back of the cabinet. Expired 8 months ago, but it still had something left." She said, "Where'd you learn to do that? Cook with nothing?" He said, "My wife." A pause. "She's been gone 6 years. He did not say anything else about it. Dorothy did not ask. The next evening he was peeling a potato with a paring knife Dorothy didn't know she owned. She watched him work. Steady hands on the blade, even though they shook when he picked up his coffee that morning. He said without looking up, "She had a garden on Birch Lane. Tomatoes mostly. She talked to them like they were children. I told her they couldn't hear her. She told me that wasn't the point." Dorothy laughed. Clarence laughed too. It was the first time she had heard him laugh. A quiet sound. Short. Like something that hadn't been used in a while but still worked. Another evening. Ivy was drawing at the kitchen table. She finished a picture. Purple house, green tree, 3 stick figures. She walked it over to Clarence and put it on his knee. He looked at it for a long time. Longer than a drawing required. He said, "That's real good, Ivy." She said, "That's you and me and Mama." She pointed at each figure. "See, you're the tall one." Clarence looked at the drawing. He didn't say anything for a moment. They moved to the porch. Ivy sat between them on the step, her head against Clarence's arm, drawing something new on the back of a receipt. The streetlight came on. A dog barked somewhere on the next block. The kind of evening that doesn't seem like anything until you realize it's everything. Ivy said, "Can he stay for my birthday?" Dorothy didn't answer right away. Clarence looked out at the street. He didn't look at Dorothy. He didn't answer for her. He just looked at the street and waited the way a man waits when he knows the answer is not his to give. Dorothy said, "We'll see, baby." Ivy said, "That means no." Dorothy said, "It means we'll see." Ivy went back to drawing. Clarence was still looking at the street. Dorothy was looking at her daughter's head against the old man's arm, and she was thinking about what Pearline had said, and she was thinking about the smell of rice and beans in a kitchen that had been cold for 2 years, and she was not sure which thought was winning. She woke up Thursday night to get water, 2 in the morning. The apartment was dark except for the light from the stove hood, the small one Dorothy left on so Ivy wouldn't be scared if she got up. Clarence was sitting on the couch. The tin box was open on his lap. Dorothy stood in the hallway. She did not step forward. She did not make a sound. She watched. He was holding something, a piece of paper. Folded many times, the creases deep and soft, the way paper gets when it has been folded and unfolded more times than anyone would count. The edges were worn. One corner was torn. He did not read it. He held it and looked at it the way you look at something you have already memorized. Something you don't need to read anymore but need to see. He sat there with it for a long time. Then he folded it carefully, placed it back in the box, and closed the lid. He put the box on his chest and leaned back. Dorothy went back to bed without the water. In the morning, she said nothing about it. She made coffee. He sat at the table. Ivy ate cereal. Everything was the same as every other morning. Except one thing. When Clarence went out to the porch after breakfast, the tin box was not in his hands. Dorothy saw it on the bookshelf by the door, sitting there between a paperback and a framed photo of Ivy's first day of school. Not hidden, not locked away, Just sat down. He had held that box against his chest every night since he arrived. Held it while he slept. Held it when he sat up. Carried it to the bathroom and back. And now it was on a shelf. Dorothy looked at it as she left for the kitchen. She saw the lid was slightly open. Inside, beside the folded letter, there was something else. A photograph. Small, faded at the edges. She couldn't see who was in it. The angle was wrong, and the light from the window didn't reach. She did not open the box. She did not touch it. She closed the lid gently and walked away. But she had seen it. And she would remember that she had seen it. The bathroom faucet had started leaking again. Not the kitchen one Clarence had already fixed. The one in the bathroom, the hot water side. A slow drip that Dorothy had been putting off because it was inside the wall and she didn't trust herself to open it up without making things worse. Saturday morning. Clarence was on the bathroom floor with a wrench and a flashlight. He had pulled the panel off the side of the tub. His upper body was halfway inside the wall cavity. Dorothy stood in the doorway watching. She said, "You're better than the guys I've called before." He backed out of the wall, sat up, wiped his hands on a rag. He said, "I did this for 40 years. A pause. He said, "Master plumber. Licensed." He said it the way you read facts off a resume that belongs to someone you used to be. Dorothy leaned against the door frame. She said, 40 years. He said, "Hendricks and Sons. Started when I was 22. Retired at 62. He tightened something inside the wall. Every building on North Avenue between Capitol and Teutonia. I've been in the pipes. Schools, churches, the old Woolworths before they tore it down. You name a building in this part of Milwaukee, I've probably kept the water running in it." He came out of the wall again, tested the faucet, dry. He nodded to himself. Dorothy said, "So how does a master plumber end up on someone's porch in the rain?" He sat on the edge of the tub. He was quiet for a long time, not avoiding the question, deciding how much of the answer to give. He said, "My wife got sick. Took 2 years. I sold the house to cover what insurance didn't." He said Birch Lane. He said the street name the way you say the name of a place that still exists, somewhere inside you even after the building is gone. 28 years in that house. Paid it off in 2009. Sold it in 2018 for the medical bills. He said, "She passed when I was 64. After that I went to my daughter in Atlanta, Nadine. She's a good woman, married, 2 kids. He paused. "Her husband is not a bad man. He just didn't sign up for a father-in-law in the guest room. He never said it, but a man knows. You can feel when you're taking up space. Someone wishes you weren't in." Dorothy said, "Did Nadine know?" He said, "She was caught between 2 people she loved. That's not a position I wanted her to be in. So I told her I missed Milwaukee. Told her I wanted to come back. She bought me a bus ticket and cried at the station, and I told her I'd be fine." He said, "That was 2 years ago." Dorothy said, "And you've been on the street since then?" He said, "Shelters mostly. Sometimes a church, sometimes a bench, if the weather allows it." He looked at the wrench in his hand. "I can fix anything in a building. Pipes, valves, joints, seals. 40 years of it. But I can't fix the part where nobody needs a 70-year-old plumber with a tremor and no address." The bathroom was quiet. The faucet was dry. The man who had fixed it was sitting on the edge of the tub holding a wrench in hands that knew more about the insides of buildings than most people would learn in a lifetime, and he had nowhere to go when he stood up. Dorothy said, "The toilet in Ivy's bathroom runs all night." Clarence looked at her. She said, "If you're not busy." He stood up. He picked up the wrench. He walked down the hall toward Ivy's bathroom without another word. Dorothy stood in the doorway of her own bathroom and listened to him work. The sound of metal on metal. A valve turning. Water shutting off and starting again. The specific competent sounds of a man doing the thing he was made to do. She thought about what he had said. About taking up space someone wishes you weren't in. She thought about how many rooms in how many houses held that exact silence, the one where someone is present but not wanted, where the politeness is a wall and the kindness is a lease, with an expiration no one will say out loud. She thought about her mother cleaning someone else's house for 22 years and never missing a day. She went to make lunch. Dorothy stopped eating dinner in the car. She had been doing it for 2 years. a granola bar on the drive to Elm Ridge, sometimes a sandwich from the gas station on Fond du Lac, eaten at red lights wrapper tucked into the door pocket. It was not a choice she had made. It was a thing that had happened to her life, one meal at a time, until it became the way things were. The second week, she started sitting at the table. Clarence cooked. Ivy sat across from her. The three of them ate together. Nobody said much. Forks on plates. Ivy humming something from school. The refrigerator running. Small sounds that added up to something larger than any of them individually. It was not a family, Dorothy knew that. But it was the shape of one. The outline. And she had not realized how long she had been living without even the outline until it was suddenly there again. She told Pearline on a Tuesday evening. They were on Pearline's porch. Ivy was inside doing homework. Dorothy said, "I forgot what it felt like, having someone in the house who's just there, not wanting anything from me, just there." Pearline was quiet for a while. She rocked in her chair. Then she said, "Be careful with that feeling, baby. It's the one that hurts most when it leaves." Dorothy didn't argue. She knew Pearline was right. She also knew that knowing something was right didn't always change what you did about it. At work that week, she noticed something. Mr. Howard in room 14, the one who never wanted his door closed, the one who asked the same 3 questions every night and forgot the answers by morning, the one most of the aides moved through quickly because there was always someone more, urgent, down the hall. Dorothy started staying longer. Not much. 2 extra minutes. She adjusted his pillow. She answered the 3 questions like it was the first time she was hearing them. She said good night and meant it. A coworker named Janelle noticed. She said, "You're gentler with Mr. Howard lately." Dorothy said, "He reminds me of someone." She didn't explain. Janelle didn't ask. But it was true. Every old man sitting alone in a room with the door open was Clarence now. Every pair of hands that shook when they held a cup. Every face that looked up when someone walked in, checking whether the person was staying or passing through. Clarence had not asked her for anything. He had not changed her mind about anything. He had simply been in her house existing quietly. And that had changed the way she saw the people she had been walking past every night for 3 years. She didn't name it. She didn't need to. She just stayed 2 extra minutes with Mr. Howard and went on with her shift. The phone rang on a Wednesday afternoon. Dorothy picked up, a woman's voice. Not a recording, not a scam, not the school, a real voice, careful and direct. She said, "I'm looking for my father, Clarence Webb." "Is he there?" Dorothy said. "Who is this?" The woman said Nadine. "Nadine Webb, Carter." "I'm his daughter," Dorothy said. "He's here. He's been staying with me for a little while." Nadine was quiet. Not surprised quiet, tired quiet. The quiet of someone who had heard a version of this sentence before. She said, "How long?" Dorothy said, "About 2 weeks." Nadine said, "He does this." A pause. "He finds someone kind, and he stays until they can't take it anymore. Then he moves on. He's done it 3 times since he left Atlanta." Dorothy said, "He hasn't been any trouble." Nadine said, "He never is." "That's not the problem." Dorothy waited. Nadine said, "The problem is he's sick, and he won't tell you." She said, "Early-stage Parkinson's, diagnosed 18 months ago. He has medication, but he doesn't always take it. He has a doctor in Atlanta he hasn't seen in a year." Dorothy didn't say anything. Nadine said, "I'm not asking you to fix it. I just need you to know what you're dealing with. He won't tell you himself. He thinks needing help and deserving it are 2 different things." The line went quiet. Then Nadine said, "If he gets worse, call me." She gave her number. Dorothy wrote it on the back of a receipt. The call ended. Dorothy put the phone down. She stood in the kitchen for a moment. Through the doorway she could see the living room. Clarence was on the couch. Ivy was on the floor in front of him. He was reading to her from a picture book, the one about the caterpillar doing a voice for it that made Ivy laugh. His hands were steady on the book. For now. The sound came at 2 in the morning. Not loud. A dull thud and then something smaller, something metal hitting tile. Dorothy was out of bed before she was fully awake. She crossed the hallway. The bathroom door was open. The light was off. Clarence was on the floor, sitting, not lying, his back against the tub, his legs stretched out in front of him. His hands were in his lap, and they were shaking, not the usual tremor but something deeper, something that had taken his whole arms with it. She knelt down next to him. She did not turn on the light. She did not call anyone. He said, "Don't." One word. She understood everything it meant. "Don't call an ambulance. Don't take me to a hospital. Don't send me somewhere else. Don't make this the last night." She said, "Okay." She put her arm under his and helped him stand. He weighed almost nothing. She had not realized until that moment how little of him there was. The coat and the flannel and the way he carried himself had hidden it. Underneath was a man who had been disappearing slowly and had gotten very good at making sure no one noticed. She walked him to the couch. He sat down. Then he lay back. The tin box had fallen when he fell. It was on the bathroom floor. The lid had popped open. Dorothy picked it up. She saw inside the folded letter, the small photograph, and next to them a Ziploc bag with 4 pill bottles, small ones, the kind with pharmacy labels and dosage instructions, and a name printed on them. She did not read the labels. She did not touch the photograph. She closed the lid and carried the box to the couch and placed it on his stomach. His hands found it immediately. His fingers curled around the edges the way they always did. He said, "Thank you, Dorothy." It was the first time he had said those words to her. In 18 days, every meal she had given him, every night on the couch, every morning she had not asked him to leave. He had said none of it until now. Until he was on the floor, and she had picked him up and not asked a single question. She said, "Go to sleep, Clarence." He closed his eyes. His hands stayed on the box. She went back to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and did not sleep for a long time. She thought about what Nadine had said on the phone. She thought about the pill bottles in the tin box. She thought about a man who weighed almost nothing, holding onto a box like it was the last thing keeping him here. Morning of the 18th day. Dorothy came home from her shift at 6:15. The apartment was different. She knew before she opened the door. Something in the quality of the silence. The couch was made. Not the way Clarence usually made it, folded blanket and centered pillow. This time the blanket was pressed flat. The pillow creased. The cushions smoothed. Made the way you make a bed you are not coming back to. Clarence was standing by the front door. The tin box in his hand, a small backpack on his shoulder. She had never seen the backpack before. He did not have it the night he arrived. He had bought it somewhere somehow with money she didn't know he had. Or maybe someone had given it to him. She didn't ask. He said, "Ivy's birthday is Saturday. I think it's better if I'm gone before then." Dorothy stood in the hallway. She understood. He was not leaving because he wanted to. He was leaving because Ivy had already drawn him into 3 pictures and asked if he could stay for her birthday, and he knew that every day he stayed made the day he left cut deeper. He was leaving to protect a 6-year-old girl from the specific hurt of loving someone who was always going to go. She said, "Where will you go?" He said, "I'll figure it out. I always do." She said, "That's not an answer." He said, "It's the only one I've got." They stood there. The hallway between them. The apartment behind her full of fixed faucets and quiet hinges, and a kitchen that still smelled like last night's rice. He said, "Tell Ivy I said goodbye. Tell her the drawing she gave me is in my bag. I'm keeping it." Dorothy said, "You can tell her yourself. She'll be up in an hour." He said, "I can't." He looked at the floor. He said, "If she asks me to stay, I will. And that's not fair to you or to her." He opened the door. He stepped out. He walked down the porch steps the same way he had walked up them 18 days ago. Slow, deliberate, each step costing something. Dorothy watched him reach the sidewalk. She did not call him back. She watched until he turned the corner and was gone. She went inside. On the kitchen table there was a piece of paper, folded in 4. She opened it. One sentence, in careful handwriting, the letters steady, despite the hand that had written them. It said, "You reminded me what a home feels like. That's worth more than I can carry." She stood at the table for a long time. Then she folded the paper and put it in the kitchen drawer behind the takeout menus and the spare keys, and the things she kept, but rarely looked at. She washed the dishes. The faucet did not drip. She opened Ivy's door. The hinge did not squeak. She walked through the apartment, and every room was quieter than the room before. Ivy woke up at 7:30. She came out to the living room. She looked at the couch. No blanket, no pillow, no Clarence. She said, "Where's the grandpa man?" Dorothy said, "He had to go, baby." Ivy looked at the couch for a long time. Then she went and sat on it. She put her hand on the cushion where he used to sleep. She sat there without saying anything. Dorothy stood in the kitchen doorway. She did not say it would be okay. She did not say he might come back. She just stood there and let her daughter sit with it, because that was the truest thing she could offer. The apartment stayed fixed. The faucet, the hinges, the lock on the back door. Everything Clarence had touched still worked. Everything he hadn't was exactly the same. 3 weeks later, Saturday afternoon, Ivy was on the couch watching cartoons. Dorothy was folding laundry at the kitchen table. The knock came at 1:15. Not a neighbor's knock, not Pearline, not the mailman. A knock with weight behind it, 2 firm beats, a pause, then 2 more. Dorothy went to the door. She opened it. A man stood on the porch. Dark suit, leather briefcase, an ID badge clipped to his breast pocket. He was maybe 40, clean-shaven glasses, the kind of person who looked like he had come from somewhere with better lighting and would be going back there shortly. He said, "Miss Wells, Miss Dorothy Wells." She said, "Yes." He said, "My name is Raymond Osei. I'm an attorney with Bridgeford and Lane. May I come in?" Dorothy did not move. Every time a person in a suit had appeared at the door of anyone she had ever known, it was bad news. Eviction, custody, debt collection, a lien, a court date. People like her did not get visits from lawyers that ended well. That was not pessimism. That was experience. She said, "What is this about?" He said, "Clarence Webb." Something in her chest moved. Not her heart, something behind it. Something that had been sitting there for 3 weeks in the space where the smell of rice and beans used to be. She said, "Is he okay?" The lawyer paused. Not a long pause, but long enough. The kind of pause that answers the question before the words do. He said, "Miss Wells, Mr. Webb passed away 9 days ago, at a hospice facility on the south side, in his sleep." Dorothy sat down. Not inside. On the porch step. The same step Clarence had stood on the night he arrived. The same concrete, the same railing, the same view of the street. She sat there, and the afternoon went on around her cars, passing a sprinkler, running 2 houses down Ivy's cartoon, playing through the screen door, and she sat. The lawyer stood on the porch above her. He did not rush. He held his briefcase and waited the way someone waits who has delivered this kind of news before and knows that the next 30 seconds belong to the other person. Dorothy said 9 days ago. He said, "Yes, ma'am." She said he was alone. He said the hospice staff were with him. His daughter was contacted. She arrived the following morning. Dorothy looked at the street. She said, "He walked down those steps 3 weeks ago. He had a backpack I'd never seen before. He told me he'd figure it out." The lawyer said, "He checked into the hospice 2 days after leaving your home. He had arranged it in advance. He knew it was time." Dorothy was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Why are you here?" He said, "Mr. Webb left specific instructions with our firm. There are things he wanted you to have, and things he wanted you to know." She said, "I barely knew him. He slept on my couch for 18 days. The lawyer looked at her. He said, "Miss Wells, he knew you." They went inside. Dorothy cleared the kitchen table. Ivy looked up from the couch. Dorothy said, "Baby, go play in your room for a little bit." Ivy went. The lawyer sat down. He opened his briefcase. He said, "Mr. Webb retained our firm 6 weeks before his passing. His estate is modest but clearly documented." He placed a folder on the table. He said, "The primary asset is the proceeds from the sale of a residential property on Birch Lane, Milwaukee. The house sold 14 months ago. After closing costs and outstanding medical obligations, the remaining balance was placed in an escrow account." He opened the folder. He turned a page toward her. He said $47,000, designated in full to Dorothy Wells. Dorothy looked at the number. She read it twice. She looked at the lawyer. She looked at the number again. She said, "That's not possible." He said, "It's documented and notarized." She said, "I let him sleep on my couch. That's all I did." He said, "According to Mr. Webb, that is not all you did." She said, "I can't take this. I don't even. He was on my couch for 18 days. This is not, I can't." The lawyer reached into the folder. He pulled out a single sheet. He said, "He anticipated you would say that. He asked me to read you this." He looked at the paper. He read, "A locked door keeps you safe. An open door keeps you human. You gotta know which one to use and when." Dorothy stopped moving. The kitchen was completely still. The refrigerator hummed. The cartoon played faintly from Ivy's room. Everything else was silence. She said, "Where did he get that?" The lawyer said, "I'm sorry," she said, "that sentence. Where did he get that sentence? That's my mother's. Those are my mother's words." "How does he know my mother's words?" The lawyer looked at the folder. He said, "There is more, Miss Wells. Quite a bit more." He pulled out a small notebook. Worn cover. Spiral bound. The kind you buy at a dollar store. He placed it on the table. He said Mr. Webb kept a record during his time on the street. Every person who showed him kindness over 2 years. Names when he had them. Dates. Locations. What they did. He opened the notebook to a page marked with a paper clip. He turned it toward her. The handwriting was small, careful, slanted to the right. Each entry was one line. Some had two. February 12th. Woman at gas station on Fond du Lac. Bought me coffee. Didn't look away. March 3rd. Man at the library. Let me sit in the reading room until closing. Called me sir. April 19th. Dorothy Wells. Elm Ridge Nursing Home. Night shift. Gave me a blanket from the supply closet at 3 a.m. and said you don't have to sleep outside. Dorothy read the entry. She read it again. She remembered. 6 months ago, a cold night. She had stepped outside during her break, and there was a man sitting against the wall near the service entrance. Old, thin, no blanket. She had gone to the supply closet, taken a spare, brought it out. She had said one sentence. She had gone back inside. She had forgotten about it by the end of the shift. She looked at the notebook, at her own name in a stranger's handwriting, at the date he had written down, at the words he had remembered precisely because they were the kind of words most people say once and never think about again. The lawyer said, "He chose you, Miss Wells. 6 months before he arrived at your door. He wrote your name down. He kept it. And when he knew he was running out of time, he chose your porch." Dorothy said, "He came to my door on purpose." The lawyer said, "Yes," she said, "because I gave him a blanket." He said, "Because you gave him a blanket and a sentence, and neither of them had conditions attached." Dorothy sat at the table looking at the notebook, a small spiral-bound record of every kindness a dying man had received in 2 years of sleeping on benches and shelter floors and church basements, every person who had looked at him and not looked through him, every name he could get, every date he could remember. She had been one line in a notebook, and that one line had brought him to her door. The lawyer said, "There is one more item." He reached into the briefcase and placed the tin box on the table. Dorothy knew it immediately. The same box, the same dull metal lid, the same worn edges. He said, "He wanted you to have this." She opened it. The folded letter she had seen that night in the dark. The photograph she had glimpsed but never looked at closely. The pill bottles were gone. She picked up the photograph first. 2 women standing in front of a house. A small house. White paint, wooden fence. Behind them a garden. Tomatoes on the vine. One of the women was young, thin, smiling. That was Clarence's wife. Dorothy had never seen her, but she knew. The other woman was standing beside her. An apron. A warm face. Younger by 20 years, but unmistakable. Dorothy's hands went still. She was looking at her mother, Ruth Wells, standing in the garden on Birch Lane. standing next to the wife of the man who had slept on Dorothy's couch. She put the photograph down. She picked up the letter, unfolded it. The paper was old, but the handwriting was the same as the notebook. Small, careful, slanted right. It read, "Dorothy, your mother's name was Ruth. She came to our house on Birch Lane twice a week for 3 years. My wife Alma was sick, the kind of sick that takes everything slowly. Ruth cooked for her, cleaned for her, sat with her. She became the only friend Alma had in the last months. She was the only person who came through that door who never made Alma feel like a patient. She made her feel like a person. When Alma passed, I wanted to shut every door in that house. Lock them all. Ruth came on a Tuesday. I told her I didn't need her anymore. She said she understood. Then she said something I have carried for 20 years. She said a locked door keeps you safe. An open door keeps you human. You gotta know which one to use and when." I never saw Ruth again after that year. I heard she moved. I heard she had daughters. I did not look for her. Life kept moving, and I let it. Then 2 years ago, on a night in April, I was sitting outside a building called Elm Ridge. I was cold. A woman came out with a blanket. She said, "You don't have to sleep outside." She went back in. I looked at her name tag. It said Dorothy Wells. I knew the last name. I knew the face. She looked exactly like Ruth. I did not say anything that night, but I wrote her name in my book, and I knew when the time came whose door I would knock on. I did not tell you any of this while I was in your home. I did not want you to be kind to me because of history. I wanted to know if the kindness was in you on its own. It was. Dorothy put the letter down. She put both hands flat on the table. She sat there for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. The afternoon light was coming through the window above the sink that didn't leak anymore, and falling across the table where a tin box sat open with a photograph and a letter, and 20 years of history she had never known existed. Her mother had stood in that garden. Her mother had said those words. Her mother had cared for a dying woman in a house on Birch Lane, and then walked out of that house and out of that story and never mentioned it. Because that was who Ruth Wells was. She did not keep a record of her kindness. She just did it and moved on. And 20 years later her daughter had done the same thing. Walked out with a blanket, said one sentence, gone back inside, moved on. Except Clarence had not moved on. He had written it down. He had carried it. And he had come back. Dorothy picked up the photograph again. Her mother's face, young, smiling. Standing next to a woman she had helped without ceremony, without record, without ever telling her daughters about it. She held the photograph the way you hold something that has just rearranged the shape of your entire life. Carefully, with both hands, like it might not be real if she let go. She drove to Birch Lane on a Sunday. She did not tell anyone she was going. She did not bring Ivy. Some things you have to stand in front of alone. The house was small, white paint, wooden fence. The new owners had put flower boxes under the front windows, purple and yellow cheerful, in a way that had nothing to do with the house she was looking for. The driveway had a different car in it. The mailbox had a different name. But in the back corner of the yard, past the fence, she could see them. Tomato plants, not in rows, not staked or tied. Growing wild against the back wall, vines tangling over each other, some heavy with fruit, some still climbing. Nobody had planted them. They had come back on their own, the way things do when the roots go deep enough. She stood on the sidewalk. She did not go to the door. She did not step onto the property. She just stood there and looked at the house her mother had walked into twice a week for 3 years. Tuesdays and Thursdays, apron folded in her bag. Bus to the stop on Capitol, then 4 blocks on foot, in the heat, in the cold, in the rain that comes off Lake Michigan like it has somewhere to be. She thought about her mother, not the big things, not the phrase about doors, not the 22 years of work, not the night after her father died. She thought about the small things. The way her mother folded her apron in thirds, always in thirds before putting it in the drawer. The way she reheated leftovers, instead of throwing them out, not because she had to, because waste was a kind of disrespect she could not tolerate, the way she said once. On a drive home from church, when Dorothy was maybe 12, "People are not problems to solve, baby. They're people to sit with. Dorothy had not thought about that sentence in years. She heard it now, standing on a sidewalk in front of a house she had never been inside, looking at tomatoes that were growing because a woman named Alma had planted them and the soil had remembered. She reached into her wallet. The piece of paper was still there, folded in four, in the same spot behind her ID where she had put it the morning Clarence left. She opened it. "You reminded me what a home feels like. That's worth more than I can carry." She read it once. She folded it back. She put it in the wallet in the same place. She looked at the house one more time, at the window where Alma might have sat, at the door her mother had walked through 100 times, at the garden that had survived without anyone tending it the way good things sometimes do. She got back in the car. She drove home. 6 months later, April. Dorothy had paid off the back rent. She had put money aside for Ivy. She had enrolled in the LPN program at Milwaukee area technical classes on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, clinical rotations on weekends. She was still working nights at Elm Ridge, but the math was different now. The margin was not as thin. The edges were not as sharp. For the first time in 4 years, she could see the next year without flinching. She came home from her shift on a Wednesday night. 2 in the morning. The street was quiet. The porch light was on. She had left it on for herself the way she always did. There was someone on her porch. A girl. Young. Maybe 20. Maybe younger. Sitting on the top step with her arms wrapped around her knees. No bag, no phone, no coat. She was looking at the ground. She did not look up when Dorothy's car pulled in. Dorothy turned off the engine. She sat in the car for a moment. She looked at the girl on the porch. She looked at the front door behind her. She thought about Pearline saying, "Be careful with that feeling." She thought about Clarence standing on that same step in the rain with a tin box against his chest. She thought about her mother's voice. She thought about the locked door and the open one and knowing which one to use and when. She got out of the car. She walked up the steps. The girl looked up, eyes tired, proud. The kind of eyes that had already decided they were not going to ask for anything. Dorothy said, "One night, just the couch." The girl looked at her. She didn't move. Then she stood up. Dorothy opened the door. She called her mother the next evening. She sat on the porch after Ivy went to bed. The girl had left that morning quietly. The couch made the blanket folded. Dorothy had found a note on the kitchen table. It said, "Thank you." 2 words. She had put it in the drawer next to Clarence's. Her mother picked up on the 3rd ring. Dorothy said, "Mama, I need to tell you something." She told her everything. The knock on the door, the 18 days, the faucet and the hinges and the rice and beans. The tin box, the lawyer, the notebook, the money, the photograph, Birch Lane. The letter. The words Ruth had said to Clarence 20 years ago that he had carried until the end of his life. Her mother was quiet for a very long time. Then she said Clarence. She said the name slowly, like she was pulling it up from a deep place. She said, "I remember that house." A pause. "I remember his wife, Alma. She was the kindest person I ever worked for. She used to say to me, 'Ruth, you don't work for me. You work with me.'" Her voice dropped. "Nobody had ever said that to me before." Dorothy said, "He remembered your words, Mama. He carried them." Her mother said, "I didn't say those words for him to carry. I said them because they were true." A long silence, the kind that holds more than any sentence could. Her mother said, "You opened the door, baby." Dorothy said, "You taught me which door to open." Neither of them spoke for a while. The evening moved around the porch. A car passed. The streetlight hummed. Her mother said, "Is the girl okay? The one from last night?" Dorothy said, "I think so. She left this morning." Her mother said, "Good." A pause. "Leave the light on tonight." Dorothy said, "I always do, Mama. Clarence Webb is not a real person. But the situation he found himself in is shared by over 40,000 Americans over the age of 65 on any given night. That number has nearly doubled in the last 10 years. They are not who most people picture when they think of homelessness. They are retired plumbers and teachers and factory workers. They are women who raised families and men who built buildings. They worked for 40 years, and then something broke. A spouse died. The medical bills came. The pension didn't stretch. The family tried, and then the family stopped trying. And a person who had spent a lifetime being useful woke up one morning with nowhere to go and no one expecting them to arrive. The fastest growing segment of the homeless population in the United States is adults over 50. Many of them have chronic health conditions. Many of them have skills. Most of them have names that someone used to call out across a kitchen table. What Dorothy did, letting someone in, is not something anyone should feel obligated to do. Opening your door to a stranger carries real risk, and this story does not pretend otherwise. But what Clarence needed to be seen, to be spoken to by name, to be treated as a person with a history and not a problem to be managed, is something the system consistently fails to provide. There are small things: knowing where the nearest shelter is and when it closes, checking on an elderly neighbor who lives alone, saying good morning to the person everyone else walks past, not because it will change the system, because it might change the day. And sometimes for someone who has run out of days that feel like they belong to them, that is enough. Some people will say Dorothy made the right call. She trusted her instincts. She opened the door. She gave an old man 18 days of something he had not had in 2 years, a home, and in return, she received more than she had imagined possible. That is the generous reading, and it is not wrong. Others will say she was reckless. She had a 6-year-old daughter asleep in the next room. She let a stranger into her house based on nothing but a feeling. In a different version of this story with a different stranger, the ending is not the same. That reading is not wrong either. And then there is the question of Clarence. He knew who Dorothy was before he knocked. He had her name in a notebook. He chose her door. He lived in her house for 18 days and never told her about the money, the house on Birch Lane, the photograph, or the connection to her mother. He let her believe he was a stranger. He watched her be kind without knowing the history, and he used that kindness to decide what she deserved. Was that fair? Was it a test she never agreed to take? Or was it the most honest measure of a person? There is what they do when they believe no one is keeping score. That question does not have one answer. It has yours. This story is fictional. Clarence, Dorothy, Ivy, Birch Lane, none of them are real in the literal sense. But the data is real. The 40,000 elderly Americans without shelter tonight are real. The families that cannot or will not make room are real. The veterans and tradesmen and grandmothers sleeping in cars and shelters and on benches outside libraries in February are real. I wrote this story because I once walked past an elderly man sleeping outside a library on a cold night, and I did not stop. I did not bring a blanket. I did not say a word. I kept walking because I was late, and because it was easier, and because I told myself someone else would help. Nobody did. I went back the next morning, and he was gone. I do not know where he went. I think about it sometimes. I think about what would have happened if I had stopped. If I had said one sentence. If I had treated him like a person with a name, instead of a problem on a sidewalk. I don't know. But I wrote this story because I wanted to imagine what might have grown from that one moment if I had chosen differently. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need it today. Subscribe to this channel. New stories every week. See you in the next one.